Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews bringing you the next episode of Review Recall. This will cover as many albums that I could listen to that were released in March of this year, and yet again, I am not doing it alone. I am joined by fellow music content creator and one half of the cassette tape, MickyT. Mick, why don't you say hello?
Hey everyone, my name's MickyT, and I'm one half of the cassette tape YouTube channel. And Keegan has asked me to join him today on the March portion of the Review Recall series, where we review albums that came out over the course of March. In this episode, Keegan has asked me to review 4 records, 4 that I've picked myself. There's one in particular that I think I have very strong opinions on, so I'm really excited to get talking about some of these albums. And yeah, I don't want to waste any more time. Thanks so much to you, Keegan, for having me on the show and having me review some of these albums. And yeah, without wasting any more time, let's just get right into it.
Alright, now that that's out of the way, we got a lot of albums to talk about. Let's dive in. This was a cool psych rock, prog rock listen, very Rush-esque, which makes sense when you factor in this being a Canadian band. I do feel like the engagement factor of the record died pretty hard after the first few tracks, but as it stands, not bad at all. You know, for a posthumous record in a genre so lucrative as trap is nowadays, this is surprisingly well done and pays tribute fairly well. Even though I wasn't the biggest fan of Keed to begin with, and this record didn't really change that all that much, I'm just happy to hear this doesn't feel like a shameless cash grab. Well, it started off pretty strong, ended strong as well with the addition of that popular song of theirs, but the back half of this record as a whole was pretty empty and full of nothing tracks. Shame it had to fall off that hard, but indie pop records have a tendency to do that nowadays, so I can't say I'm all that surprised, just disappointed. Princess Nokia taking a pop rap approach, and I just don't care for it. While it is over an hour long, this has got to be one of the most memorable and concise modern country albums I've heard in a while. Consistently enjoyable, doesn't really get tiring, which is quite a feat for modern country. I've been praising Luke Combs for years now. If you aren't tapped in, get on that. This is the debut album from this drill, cloud rap, bop collective, which I found quite enjoyable. Of course, with me enjoying pretty much everything the individual members did, hearing them come together for a full project was bound to work in some capacity, and it makes for some bangers with excellent production, good performances, and a fun vibe all around. If this genre is your cup of tea, you have no reason to sleep on this. Latest record from this Indian jazz fusion artist who I've only recently become known of. Saw he had a record out and wanted to check it out myself, and man, the percussive melodies on this record are so top notch, it's not even funny. It's just such an easy record to get lost in the vibe of, had a blast with it, check it out. Definitely better than Kai's last EP, Peaches, certainly his most upbeat collection of tracks as well, which is really refreshing since his solo career up to this point has followed a more sultry R&B route. Honestly, may just be my favorite from the EXO member. I kinda get this album's appeal. It's gentle, fairly easygoing, lyrically rich too, and certainly has some excellent harmonies and warm melodies, which is pretty much expected given the 3 who make up the supergroup. That being said, this is not anything groundbreaking at all. Maybe it's just because of the sheer quantity of music I often listen to, but it just doesn't do all that much to stand out. Still, I do think it's a good album and very worthy of the attention it's getting.
Okay, so the first album that I'm going to be talking about in this series of reviews has a bit of a long title, so just bear with me. Praise the Lord who chews but which does not consume, or simply Hot Between Worlds by Yves Tumor. Yves Tumor is the alias of US singer-songwriter Sean Bowie, who has been releasing music for a few years now under the Yves Tumor name. I believe this is their 6th album in their catalogue under that name. And it's going to be an interesting follow-up to Heaven to a Tortured Mind, which was Bowie's 2020 release. And it was actually a very good album that had some really interesting approaches to art rock. It had some psychedelic influences, some glam rock influences. And with this new record now, they bring in some influences that stem from post-punk while maintaining that kind of hypnagogic and psychedelic approach to production. And I was very excited to check out this album, mostly because I really enjoy Bowie's approach to songwriting. I really enjoy what they bring to the table in terms of ideas and production. And generally, I was just hyped across the board to hear what was going to happen with this record, because everyone I've spoken to loves this album. But after listening to it, I just wasn't really feeling the album, to be honest. And it's a shame, because I genuinely think there's 2 brilliant tracks in there. But the thing is, I just felt like everything else in the album just kind of blended together and didn't really manage to stand out. I don't know, I had a tough time sitting through this album every single time that I've tried, because despite the production being really great and despite having a couple of really good highlights, everything else in between just felt kind of aimless and didn't really do much to stand out or felt purposeful. And as a result, I just felt totally disengaged by what Sean Bowie was trying to do on this record. And I know that's a hot take because I've been called out on that already. But to be honest, I just don't know. I'm not really feeling it. As much as I've tried to get into it, I've always just felt like it just didn't really click with me. I feel like it just blends a bit too much together. It doesn't really feel like it stands out that much apart from the opening and the closing track. You know, everything else is just kind of sandwiched in between, and it just doesn't really feel all that gratifying of a listen for me personally. And you know, I'm sad that I didn't really enjoy it, because generally I really enjoyed what Sean Bowie brings to the table in terms of production and in terms of songwriting and things like that. This score is probably very harsh, but for me it was a 4 out of 10. I didn't really feel it that much.
Yeah, at this point, I just don't get the appeal behind Mach-Hommy anymore. I think dude's one of the most overrated rappers currently active. While his lyrical pen game is good, I just think he's so uninteresting in his delivery and flow. His recent material has been very hit or miss for me, and this new one is kind of contributing to that. This just sounds like Of Mice and Men, but worse. I don't know who would listen to this over any other typical metalcore band out there. You know, despite all the shit that I give DJ Drama, dude knows how to craft a solo record. While it is a step up from the band's debut album, Delirium, that's hardly a glowing review. The difference in evolution this band experienced between albums is negligible at best. I get that's kind of the point of bands in this scene. Trust me, I've seen enough to know that by now. But it really felt prominent here, especially since I have heard better in this same scene. To summarize, not my first choice for a modern AOR album, but certainly not a detestable record at all. I am both angry this album isn't getting talked about more, but also completely understanding why this album isn't getting talked about more. On one hand, Kali's vocals are excellent. The instrumentals are smooth, very tasteful, very enjoyable all around, but it doesn't do anything to push the needle forward, advance her sound, do much at all. It's a very good record, no doubt, but that's about it. Debut EP from this K-pop boy group here, and this one was unique, to say the least. Much more hip-hop focused and full of young voices. It all sounds very wiggly, if that makes any sense. It has its moments, particularly in the instrumentation, but other than that, it's just a fine listen. In typical rapper tradition nowadays, Nothing Nowhere decided to switch up his sound from emo rap to a much more aggressive, screamo, nu metal, kind of industrial metal route. I often find that when rappers do this switch up, I think it works very well, and no surprise here, I enjoyed this one a good bit too. Okay, I'm not all that familiar with UMO, but I love this album's fusion of funk, rock, bit of dance, some lo-fi vibes as well. I feel like some moments meander a bit too much and prevent me from fully gushing over this, but if you're looking for an album for chilling on a sunny day, here's your candidate. Give it a try. As much as I typically enjoy young Nudy, especially the Dr. Evil and EA Monster albums he dropped, Gumbo here is a bit of a disappointment. Just feels a bit flatter and lifeless compared to those other 2 albums. Not one I'm going to revisit if I ever need my young Nudy fix. Shout out to my mod for giving me this recommendation here. Not too familiar with this general scene, but I had a good time with this. Lush, calming, all-around smooth jazz pop from the Portuguese vocalist. Perhaps a little bit too one-note for my liking, but if you're into artists like Bruno Pernadas, who also produced this album in full, there's no reason to miss this.
Okay, the next album that I've chosen to cover is Lil Pump 2 by Lil Pump. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, no one is expecting much out of a new Lil Pump album. You know, maybe a banger or two, but that's really it. And while Lil Pump 2 isn't his worst record, that definitely goes to the Harvard Dropout. It's just such a failure of an album in so many ways to me. You know, it's pretty transparent that Pump was trying to revitalize his career. He's trying to go back to kind of what made him blow up in the first place. But a gimmick can only really take you so far. And as much as he tries, he just sounds so tired and desperate. Lil Pump 2 is the equivalent of like a really shitty like boomer cock rock band that was trying their hardest to sound young again. But you know, they're all fat and gross and lethargic and middle-aged and creepy. But the catch here is that Lil Pump is 22 years old, trying to sound like a dumbass 16-year-old that blew up from the Florida SoundCloud way. Whenever he's trying to do the same thing or try and recapture the gimmick, he hops on some new rage beats probably and attempts to do some kind of Detroit trap flows as well. But for me, they just all fall really flat in almost every conceivable way, especially because of how mediocre they sound, and just the sheer mediocrity of what Pump is doing is just very transparent. It's all just plain boring, to say the least, and the only parts that were genuinely entertaining were the tracks that are just so bad that they're funny. Like the Pump Rock X Heavy Metal song that Pump has on this is just a gold mine. It's so funny. And the entirety of Ain't With That as well. Jesus, that song is fucking ridiculous. Also, tracks like Tesla, which people do seem to kind of like from this album, are doing nothing for me as well. I just find it really flat and just really generic. Aside from all that, the second half of the album especially is just a long slog of nothing. There's no entertainment value. It's just monotonous. It's very hard to sit through. There isn't really much to say about it, to be honest. But, yeah, it really just gets carried by how ridiculous some of its songs are. And aside from that, there's just very little entertainment value from it. And like I said, it's not the worst Lil Pump album. I think the Harvard Dropout is even more egregious. But this album is just a failure. It's just transparently trying too hard to be the old Lil Pump when it's not real. Like, he's just not that guy anymore. He's not the 16-year-old that was just clowned on and memed on for being a dumbass. Like, kudos to the guy. He got sober. He's a different man now. And that's great to hear from Lil Pump. But the music, it's just not very good, to say the least. And with that in mind, I feel like giving Lil Pump 2 a 3 out of 10.
You know, he sure puts the 6 in black. 6 black? Well, it doesn't really make sense when you put it like that, but you know what I mean. Is it excellent? No. Is it also abhorrently bad like some of the internet says? Also no. In fact, I'd argue that this is a good time. Sure, there were some clunkers easily, and I found the lyrical content to be some of the worst parts of the record, but damn it, this album had some catchy as hell moments, I can't deny. Regarding the whole Björk comparisons, I don't care, dude. Comparisons have rarely devalued a record for me. The only thing I'm willing to say is that it's a more accessible album. So yeah, I don't hate this. I don't fully love it either. I think I'll just stick in my pleasant middle ground, thank you. This is pretty cool. A lot of the metalcore I've heard recently has been very standard and uninteresting. This is probably one of the better metalcore albums I've heard in a good bit. Guitar work is great, drums are flashy, great songwriting too, and a lot of it feels very emotional, which I don't typically pick up on in this scene. Yeah, if you're on the fence with like gent or metalcore or anything like that, I'd recommend giving this one a try. Okay, there is no swag anywhere on this tape. Why the hell would Soulja Boy think he has 5 of them? So, Motomami was a little bit of a disappointment for me, and Rao's last album, Saturno, was an unexpected highlight last year, so I had no idea what to expect with this brief collaborative EP, and thankfully the 3 tracks here turned out to be a good way to spend 10 minutes. All things considered, a decent trap record. Not something that's going to blow your mind or change your outlook on the genre, not by a long shot, but if you're looking for some decent, mindless bangers, I think this is a solid time. This is my first time indulging in this indie rock noise pop band, and I gotta say, this was pretty fun. I'll admit the fire did start to die down near the back end, but for what it's worth, it's a very interesting record and makes me excited to hopefully check these guys out more down the road. Lupin the First would probably be my favorite of these Logic B tapes currently, so a supposed sequel to that was promising, and while I won't say it's on the same level, it's one of the better ones, so I'll take it. say the least, this is a really cool record. An oddly somber and very unique take on art pop, fairly quirky and memorable. Shane the Closer kinda sucks and is a horrible way to end things, but I do think this is a great record nonetheless. I don't know. But I kinda think the internet's overhating this one, to be honest. Damn, this is a really fun time. I recently went through the entire gecs discography because I've been sleeping on them, I'll admit, but 10,000 gecs is probably the most well fleshed out and cohesive collection of tracks the duo has done yet. 1000 gecs may have the stronger bangers, this is the most enjoyable overall album experience. Absolutely love it. I've just grown to expect consistency from both of these artists over the past year or so of following them, so no doubt another collaborative effort between the two was going to be great. Perhaps not as great as Reloaded, but still a great listen. Check this out, go support these underground artists, they deserve it. Holy shit, wow! Gorgeous production, gorgeous vocals from the K-pop vocalists, and his debut full-length Korean album here. Absolutely love this record. This may get a high spot on my year-end list. Excellent record. One of the more hit or miss records in this underground scene I've heard. Certainly has its moments, but also has some of the ugliest flows and bars from its guest features I've heard in a while. If you want a better record from Blank Thought this year, just check out Winter Break. I think it's more worth your time.
Okay, next up we have Ignore Grief by Shushu. Jamie Stewart and co are back with a new album 2 years after their previous record, Oh No, which was a record where Jamie was doing duets with other artists featured on the songs, and while Oh No was a pretty okay record, it didn't really blow me away that much. And I was actually fairly excited to check out this new Shushu record because apparently they're getting back into their bag into more terrifying soundscapes. Probably their most terrifying sounding album since A Girl with a Basket of Fruit, which came out in 2019, I believe. And across this album, you're going to be hit with some kind of death industrial influences, some ambience, some droning, some very experimental ideas going on in the production. But for me, I feel like the full product doesn't really meet its full potential. And I mean, this is an interesting kind of sound palette. I just don't feel like Jamie Stewart and co were able to bring much that was totally captivating about it. For me, Shushu are at their best at making terrifying music when they aren't actively trying to make terrifying music, if that makes any sense. Because the tension and the darkness that's in these releases, like usually it's done effortlessly, but on Ignore Grief, I feel like it's just a bit lacking in a sense. I think maybe there's overestimations there, but honestly, I just feel like it's not really doing that much for me. I feel like, you know, it's finely produced and all that, but I just generally didn't really think it had much to offer. It's sonically that Shushu haven't really done before, and it just doesn't feel as fulfilling as maybe some of the stuff that they've done prior. There's some good moments in there, you know, the Real Chaos Cha 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 is pretty decent, and Border Factory was actually pretty alright too. But aside from that, the rest of the album just kind of falls flat in its face in my opinion, and it feels like just kind of a tamer effort from Shushu that could have been way better than what it actually was. But yeah, all in all, it's an alright album. It's not really that memorable. Of course, I appreciate and respect the artistry that Shushu are trying to bring forth with this record, but all in all, I just feel like it falls flat and isn't really as memorable. And with that, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, this one wasn't it for me. The thing is, Larry is such a laid-back rapper on this project, borderline lethargic on some songs, and when paired with Alex's luscious, show-stopping production, he just doesn't really stack up. Also, not too crazy about some of the lyrics on here. I felt like he was getting consistently outshined by his guests as well, like Action Bronson, Wiz Khalifa, Evidence, especially Big Sean. To be honest, there are better Larry June records, there are far better Alchemist records. I'm sticking with those over this one any day. Yes, more of this, please, all of it. A very solid little collection of tracks from Blast here, yet again just proving he's one of my favorite R&B trap hybrid rappers. As much as I am an avid lover of pop punk, and I do think this album is enjoyable inherently, I swear I've heard the exact riffs and melodies on this record utilized by other bands, and arguably done better by them too. Quando Rondo really got my attention in him reignited with the release of his collaborative album with Youngboy that was surprisingly good. So I figured to check out this latest record of his, and one thing's for sure, he's doing this melodic trap style a lot better than a majority of his contemporaries. So that's what kind of prevents me from calling it generic, but it's not standout enough to where I think it's worthy of a second full listen. Got some bangers no doubt, but not that stellar. As someone who's not the biggest M83 fan in general, I had a very solid time listening to this, particularly in the flow and pacing of the album. Typically, dream pop is not a genre I'm all that fond of, however, this album seemed to really hit the nail perfectly. It was engaging, fairly cohesive, perhaps a little bit slow on the back end aside from the closer, but honestly, I enjoyed this a lot more than I expected to. Damn, okay, I'm not as closely connected to Bones as I am other cloud rap artists, and even though I wasn't head over heels for this one, damn, this guy has potential. Gave me a lot of motivation to visit his extensive back catalog spanning nearly a decade, and I'm hyped for his future endeavors as well. Her best since NFR, easily. Great collection of tracks, surprisingly doesn't overstay its welcome despite being like 80 minutes long, but this really felt like it had a similar magic to it that was imbued so deeply into NFR. I will say, those interludes are a huge waste of time though. Cut those out of the track list and this could have easily seen top spot for album of the year, but as it stands, I mean, it's still probably going to see that list. This is the second EP I've heard from this German cloud rap artist Sparrow, who I covered in an earlier review recall with the Versteck EP. And with Nadia here, I think it's another great collection of tracks. Might have a few iffy mixing moments, but the melodies are solid, and the closer is pretty much a pop song, which was a breath of fresh air. Yeah, 2 for 2 on this artist so far. Looking forward to the next one. Not a bad all-time low record by any means. I don't know how they can make worse than Last Young Renegade, but I do like the slight experimentation into different lanes here, ranging from better attempts at pop-focused music to more standardized rock. While there are some clunkers, there are some genuinely great songs on here. Of course, nothing's gonna beat the songs that followed the more pop-punk side, as that's all-time low's bread and butter, but you're not gonna see me roasting this one. To put it simply, Juicy J's done better, especially that collaborative album with Wiz Khalifa, that was really good. This and his collab with Pierre Bourne have just been lackluster by comparison. Excellent outing from Twice here. Typically with some of these K-pop releases, I often find the B-sides to be underwhelming. Here, every track hits, and every track is a banger. One of the best Twice projects I've heard to date. This was actually kinda good. Young kids got solid flows, good energy, quotables to boot. Perhaps a bit of an annoying voice, but I've heard far worse in my years of experience with trap rap. Yeah, I like this one. Fuck, dude, this rips. Excellent energy with still a good semblance of melodies here. If you want some banging, fiery grindcore, check this out. This is better than B.O.B's album last year. I actually thought the opening track here was pretty good. Unfortunately, the rest of the album kinda nosedives into cringy lyrics, odd flows, and a bizarre 11-minute closing track that managed to destroy every ounce of hype I struggled to build. While I'm not as in love with this one as I was with Pop Evil's last album, Versatile, this was still a fun time. Admittedly, it does sound like every mainstream metalcore band dabbling with pop does, but honestly, I just can't get enough of that sound. It just clicks with me so much. So yeah, I had no choice but to enjoy this one on some level. You know, for what it is, it's okay, but I just don't have a clue what kind of artist Matt Ox is trying to be at this point. This just sounds like Dollar Store Cardi, but with horrible vocals. At least the instrumentals are pretty okay, but not eager to revisit it at all. Was anyone even aware this came out, like, at all? Hell, I didn't even know about it until I saw the releases for the week. Anyway, it's a typical Owl City record, decent electropop, synthpop material. It's not the worst thing he's done, and I'm always relatively fond of Adam's style of writing, even at its cheesiest and most redundant. Yeah, I didn't hate it, but no way in hell is this an essential listen for the year. It's a decent little project from Conway here, though probably one of the weaker ones I've heard in the past few years. The other ones have a bit more magic to them that just feels lacking on this one here. Though by no means does that make this bad, it's still quite good. Although I am definitely going to be revisiting the other Conway projects this decade first before this one. Yeah, Dinosaur sure is right. A dinosaur band existing way past their due dates. An all-around decent showing from Hit-Boy. Very consistent guest list as well, and Hit-Boy himself on the mic isn't too shabby. Wouldn't call it a phenomenal record by any means, but I don't think it should go ignored. If this is a summer vacation, it perfectly explains why I prefer winter. Lucky that I even enjoy this particular hip-hop sound a la Kevin Gates and Moneybagg Yo, both of which are actually on this record too. Otherwise, I would have been much more negative towards this album here. But yeah, this was pretty much just Control-C, Control-V 21 times. I don't typically talk about cover albums, mostly because I feel like I don't need to, but given the fact that Van Morrison has had a pretty abysmal decade in terms of music so far, with both of his recent albums seeing spots on my worst lists, I was curious to see how this one would go. Shockingly, when Van solely cares about the music instead of the subject matter, it's surprisingly enjoyable. I do think most of the covers here are done better by their original artist or by other covers, especially since Van doesn't have the best voice at his age, but the instrumentation is fairly solid. The only real gripe I have with this is that it's 90 minutes long and 23 tracks. It did not need to be, but I'm just glad Van avoided the hat trick of truly bad albums. Ooh, Powfu went a little bit lo-fi on this one. Bit quieter, a bit more reserved. This time with a few more cringe-inducing lyrics, so I'd say it cancels out to an alright EP.
And the final album that I'm going to be talking about today is Scaring the Hose by JPEGMAFIA and Danny Brown. Of course I love this album, why wouldn't I? JPEGMAFIA and Danny Brown have pretty much been running the experimental hip-hop scene for years now. You know, Peggy has been coming out with records like Veteran and All My Heroes Are Cornballs and LP, as well as some EPs too. And Danny Brown has been doing his own thing with records like Atrocity Exhibition, which is one of my favorite albums of all time, and You Know What I'm Saying, and he has some classic mixtapes too, like the XXX mixtape. And when people heard that Danny Brown and JPEGMAFIA were going to be making an album together, that was just a match made in heaven. It's a match made for weirdo music nerds, and it is fantastic. And for me, honestly, it's probably my favorite album of the year so far. This record I just had so much fun with, and I've listened to it so many times. Of course, Peggy is handling all the production across the album, as per usual, and he kills it. There's a lot of glitchy beats on this thing, lots of distorted, kind of shittily mixed beats across this thing, but they just go so hard. There's so many creative samples in here, loads of dynamic ideas, like the guitars on Garbage Pail Kids. There's also the very atmospheric and cloudy production on Kingdom Hearts Key, and plenty of like Chipmunk Soul samples as well, which go over really well. And as far as Peggy and Danny are concerned, they trade off each other very well. There's very good synergy between the two. I think that Danny could have been a bit more present, but at the same time, I think he killed it. Peggy, of course, went hard. There's loads of really fucking great bars on this thing, loads of really fun back and forths, fun tracks. The cannabis bar is too fucking funny, I can't. And you know, some of my favorite tracks in the year are on this thing as well. Obviously the aforementioned Garbage Pail Kids, Scaring the Hose, the opening track Lean Beef Patty, and actually my favorite one is Fentanyl Tester. That track just goes fucking hard. Best song titles in the game. And yeah, generally across the board, I just think this was just what you would expect from a Danny Brown and a JPEGMAFIA album, and it just goes so hard. I really enjoyed it. They even released a little EP a few days ago, the DLC pack, which, you know, it's easy to see why they were left off Scaring the Hose, but, you know, the last two tracks fucking bang. All in all, this has been an album that I've just fucked with heavy since it came out. I just love the production. I think that Danny and Peggy just went off on this thing. There's a load of really great lines in this thing, loads of great samples, plenty of great beats. And across the board, Danny and Peggy are just class, simple as. It's just insane to me that this album even exists. And I'm not complaining that it exists because it is just fucking brilliant. And yeah, some of my favorite tracks of the year are on this thing. I mentioned them already. And generally, it's probably my album of the year so far. And with that in mind, I'm giving Scaring the Hose a 9 out of 10.
Debut record from the BTS vocalist, more so an EP with only 5 original tracks, and I absolutely get why people aren't vibing with this one. Some of the processing and vocal mixing here is pretty ugly, but I do think the tunes themselves carry enough weight to make this an enjoyable little listen. A very, very inoffensive hip-hop record here, but not particularly mediocre. I think the flows are solid, the beats may be brittle, but it suits EST's colder delivery. Not bad at all. In fact, I'd say there are moments that make it fairly good. I'll admit this album didn't have me fully sold at first. The first leg was solid, certainly consistent, especially Smoke Sprite with RM, but it wasn't until the back leg started with Exit to Canada, oh my god, that's where I was especially hooked. All in all, a very solid sophomore album. This is just a fun, goofy little trap album. If you just lighten up and go in with an open mind, this will be an absolute blast. I do think there's a few moments that kind of go beyond that and make it a tad obnoxious, but this one had me smiling the whole way through. God damn, they sure clean up nice after the shitstorm that was Mania. This feels very similar to Folie à Deux, which is my favorite Fall Out Boy album, so naturally, I love this. Debut album from the Polish hip-hop collective, and I'll be honest, this just sounds like a good chunk of modern hip-hop we'd hear in the Western world, but just in a different language. Some of the flows and members are a bit more lively, a bit more charismatic, but I would not call this anything special. Alrighty folks, that is going to do it for this episode of Review Recall. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Want to give one last shout out to MickyT for being in this video. Thank you so much.
Thanks a million, Keegan, for having me on. Really appreciate being on the show. Thank you so much, viewers. Please subscribe to Keegan.
All of his social medias will be in the description below. Go support and go check him out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.